The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Reconciliation includes many things and many voices. Tonight, as part of our collaboration with ROMA, the Rural Ontario Municipal Association, during their annual conference, we'll hear how towns, cities, and First Nations communities are forging new and better relationships. Then Steve finds out why attracting newcomers to smaller communities isn't as simple as having plenty of jobs waiting for them. It's Monday, January 24th, and that's next on the agenda. Across this province, rural municipalities and First Nations communities have long existed side by side, but quite separate in their daily activities. That's beginning to change. As TVO partners this week with the Rural Ontario Municipal Association during its annual conference, let's welcome three voices who've been working on that. With us now, Wendy Landry, President of the Northwestern Ontario Municipal Association and Mayor of Shunia, which is just east of Thunder Bay on the north shore of Lake Superior. Peter Collins, Chief of the Fort William First Nation, also in the Northwest. And Diane Therrien, Mayor of Peterborough in Central Ontario. Hello to you all. Earlier today at the Rural Ontario Municipal Association Conference, I hosted a fireside chat with former Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Perry Bellegarde. I asked him about the state of relations between the 133 First Nations communities in this province and their neighboring municipalities. Here's what he said.
I'll just say it needs work. Every relationship will need work. Are they working together? Are there close relationships between municipal councils and the local chief and council? Do you know how the chief and councils meet? Do you know the governance structure? Do you know the different provincial territorial organizations that these First Nations belong to? Do you have a relationship with them? Because basically, if you embrace it and know and build a relationship with your local First Nations community, that will bode well for the educational system, the economic system, the healthcare system, because we all have to work together and build a brighter future. And that really begins with relationship building.
Chief Collins, I wanted to start with you. What kind of relationship do you currently have with your closest municipal neighbor, in your case, the city of Thunder Bay?
Well, for us in the city of Thunder Bay, we continue to work and trend in the right direction. I think we want to build off the declaration that was signed in 2011 between the city and Fort William, and building that strong relationship that the former Chief Perry Bellegarde was speaking about. Relationship building is an important aspect of who we are and how we want to progress. I mean, education is an important aspect of our community and our municipality also at the same time. I think we want to build strong relationships, strong partnerships, building our economy. And my comments and my message to the municipality, whatever we do in Fort William, can only benefit the city of Thunder Bay. Whatever the city of Thunder Bay does can only benefit Fort William. And we can continue to work together on that major aspect of relationship building. And I think educating each other about who we are, how our communities got to be where they are today, and the economy. It's an important aspect of Fort William First Nation. We want to make sure that it's strong here and strong to support the community of Thunder Bay at the same time. So it's an important aspect of who we are, building that strong relationship with each other and understanding who the strong commitments that we have in improving our economy, the health and educations in our communities.
And Mayor Landry, Chief Collins spoke about the importance of building these relationships. How about in your case, what are your relations like between the town you represent and the First Nations communities in your area?
Well, Nam, as a First Nations woman elected as a mayor in Ontario, we find ourselves on journeys that we didn't necessarily anticipate. And, it's been an opportunity for me to educate our municipal partners on the history of our Indigenous people and our communities. Being Shunia, which is Ojibwe for money, silver, coin, educating our communities and being a neighbor of Thunder Bay, and then in between on the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory, the relationship is huge. And being on the executive for AMO and the lead on the Indigenous Relations Task Force has given an opportunity to educate our municipalities on our history and how to build relationships with our communities and our next door neighbors. It's really, really important for our municipal leaders to realize that we exist on traditional territory, and there's a huge long history prior to municipalities coming and settling, and that understanding and that listening needs to start. And it has started in many occasions, many instances, and it needs to continue. And as the chief reflected on his relationship with Thunder Bay, our municipality, you know, we have relationships with Fort William First Nation as well as the Red Rock Indian Band and the communities that find themselves in the city area. But more importantly, as the representative for Northwestern Ontario Municipal Association, I have to recognize the work that our 37 municipalities are doing with all of their neighbors and all of their First Nations communities that are neighboring with them, and how important that is, and the work that's being done. And it's driven by leadership. So leadership has to realize that this is something we're not going away. Our First Nations are not going away. Our Indigenous people are the fastest growing population, and you know, it only makes sense that we work together to sustain our communities and build our economies.
You mentioned something, Mayor Landry, that I just wanted to follow up on. You talked about that leadership, the communication, but earlier you mentioned this is a journey that you're on that you didn't anticipate. What did you mean by that?
Well, I'm the first, I didn't realize this at first, but being the first First Nations woman to be elected as a mayor in the province of Ontario, you find that there's a responsibility in bringing, you know, the two worlds together. And I've found that it's been a journey in educating and taking the opportunity to educate our municipalities and our municipal leaders on our true history. Because before we can move forward, Canada needs to know the truth. And if you're going to move forward with reconciliation, it's important to understand that truth first. So I've found myself in a position where I've been able to help educate our history to municipalities and bring together some understanding on how we move forward and building relationships.
Does it feel heavy sometimes to have all that responsibility?
Sometimes it feels very heavy. You know, we hope to make a lot of progress, and sometimes I feel that the expectation is high, but it's about leadership, and it's about people taking the time and the efforts to build relationships from the ground up, and not forced relationships, but honest, genuine desire to build relationships to move forward.
And Mayor Therrien, Peterborough's population is less than 100,000, but you're also part of the larger county of Peterborough. Tell us about the Indigenous residents in your area.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm calling in from Anishinaabeg territory, Williams Treaty territory. I actually moved to Peterborough from Hamilton over a decade ago to do my master's degree in Indigenous Studies at Trent University, and sort of fell in love with the community, and I'm still here. And so, you know, Peterborough, the city, is a single tier municipality. We are surrounded by the county of Peterborough. Within that, there's Curve Lake and Hiawatha First Nations, you know, who I have a great working relationship with the chief and council there. Peterborough itself also has, urban Indigenous communities, and we have the Nogo-Jiwanong Friendship Center. So there's a lot of really great institutions doing work in the Indigenous context, the urban Indigenous context. But the relationships between Curve Lake and Hiawatha is something that has been a priority for me since I came into the office of mayor.
And how well do you know the two chiefs?
Very well. I'm fortunate. Chief Emily Wheatung from Curve Lake and Chief Laurie Carr from Hiawatha, I'm very honored to call them friends as well. I mean, we have a group text chain that we kind of share information and sometimes commiserate on issues. So, that's been a very important relationship for me, even when I was just a counselor last term. And, we text or call each other about issues that impact the community, and also sometimes just as women in politics, and and people, who are kind of dealing with some of the stuff that we have to deal with. And I've worked really hard to build those relationships with city staff, and myself have gone out to both Hiawatha and Curve Lake councils to present on different city initiatives that are happening. For example, our new arena and aquatics complex that we're building. And so there's a lot of work being done to try to sort of codify those relationships, so that because I'm not running again for mayor, so whoever comes in next, I know there was some concern from the chiefs about, will this relationship continue, because it wasn't there under my predecessor. So we're trying to make sure that it can be kind of codified, so that the next term of council continues the work that's been done.
I mean, I can't not follow up with that. Why are you not running again for mayor?
Oh, there's many reasons, and I posted a little bit on it on social media. Peterborough is in a lot of ways a really progressive city, but we do require a majority of councillors and staff to really push forward some of those really progressive agendas items, and that it's been a challenge. But I've got a series of sort of blog posts that'll be forthcoming that outline and elaborate on some of those reasons.
Okay, I won't push too much. But, we've been talking about relationships, and I think it's probably easier to have a one-on-one relationship, because when you have a one-on-one relationship, whatever stereotypes or blind spots, those are easy to erase. And Chief Collins, there's a long history of incidences of racism that's well documented in Thunder Bay. How can you work with each other if these attitudes still prevail?
And I guess that's the most challenging part, I think, when we talk about this between Mayor Morrow and myself. I mean, we continue to try to find solutions to really close that gap and, bring those people to the forefront and realize that the harm they're having and the impact they're having on not only First Nation people, but ourselves in municipal settings, and how it's impacting everybody's day of life. One of the things that, resonates in my mind on a continuous basis, and had a couple of young ladies that come into my office and they want to interview me based on their education system. And they come there to learn about our culture. And I said, I'm going to give you a history lesson. And that history lesson I give them, it did well for them. And they got an A+ in school. But at the end of our conversation, that's something that, the young lady said to me, well, that's not what our parents are teaching us. And I think that's the challenging part in our communities. It's about teaching our kids what's right and what's wrong, eventually racism will go away. I mean, there's always going to be those racist people in all walks of our societies. And it's a challenging situation, but we have to educate each other about our aspects of who we are, where we come from, and the contributions that we made. We've been challenged many, many times at our level because of the land claims. And why are you getting land claims? Well, it's because you forced us off our lands. It's because you uprooted our communities. You've taken our schools, you've taken our children, you've taken our, you removed graves from our original settings. And those land claims seem to have bring racist tones back out in the mainstream society, because they think we're getting money for nothing. But it's not for nothing. It's for the loss of our lands. It's the loss of our treaty rights. It's the loss of all the resources that go along with that. And it's a work in progress. I think we're making pretty good strides here in the Thunder Bay area. We continue to work together, both Mayor Morrow and myself. Again, we were having quarterly meetings at City Council, having good dialogue about who we are, what we need to do together, and bringing health and wealth and well-being, and closing the gap on racism in Thunder Bay. We created a racism coalition between Fort William and all the entities around the region to really address the issue at hand and work together and making good progress on that front. So still a lot of work, but we continue to work together. And I think that's the important part, is continuing to work together with each other. I mean, Mayor Terry in there, I mean, good allies, and Chief Weetung and Chief Card are very strong advocates for First Nation rights. And Wendy works very hard in her municipality and making folks understand that so many contributions that we have made, and that we only want to be recognized for the contributions and the work that we do in our community. So there's still lots of work, but we're working in progress with each other. And I think that's the important side of it, working together and, not thinking about being political people at the same time. Like, I'll use Mayor Diane there, talking about building that friendship, and friendship goes a long way. And that's what got me good work and good progress in my community. I never treated people like they were my enemies. I treated them like they were my friend, not like a political body. So, and I think that goes very, very well, and making good progress and taking away racism in our community. So that's our work that we continue to do together.
Mayor Landry, Chief Collins says that racism will eventually be gone. And I do really believe that, because I see that with my kids. But we know that bigotry exists. Racism can kill. You mentioned there has to be truth before reconciliation. How can you work with each other if these attitudes still prevail when you are trying to rebuild communities?
Well, I think, if you can change the thought process and the mindset of one person at a time and challenge their thinking of where they're coming from, it really is just a lack of education and a lack of knowledge of the true history of Indigenous Canadian relations, right? So, having those frank discussions, and I've been doing a historical Indigenous 101 with municipalities as requested by them in educating. We have a lot of our municipal elected officials are of a different generation. They come from a different education, and they come from a time where they were learning from the books that were created by Canada on the history of Indigenous people. And so to know the true history changes the mindset. And again, it goes back to leadership and developing those relationships that are genuine for the right reasons, not a forced relationship, right, through consultation or anything like that. But to want to do the right thing and to learn about the history. I think it's a blessing with our children, and we see that with our young people today, that taking on challenges of challenging conversations to challenge that mindset and challenge that thinking, I think is great. So I think it, will reduce. Will it forever 100% go away? Probably not. There'll always be feeders that'll contribute to attitudes and perception, like Chief Collins mentioned, land claims and stuff like that. But if our people are educated and our municipalities are educated with the true history, then it makes for a pathway of understanding and a pathway of building relationships without having that fear or that preconceived notions of how things are going to go before they even go to the table, and have those heartfelt conversations to genuinely learn about the history. Then I think that we can move forward on a pathway that is encouraging and is positive.
We know that in order for these conversations to move forward, that we need all voices at the table, and we've heard about representation, why it matters. And Mayor Landry, you spoke about maybe some of the responsibility you feel in your position. How did people react to you when you first got involved in local affairs?
It's, I was a councillor before I was a mayor, and for the most part, I was, welcomed and encouraged to run for mayor. And then, along the way and along the campaign trail, you start knocking on doors, and I got phone calls asking if I was going to turn Shunya into a reservation, to quote individuals, and had to chuckle by the lack of knowledge and the lack of understanding of what exactly you can do or powers you have or don't have in a municipal context. But the lack of understanding became very, very obvious through my knocking on the doors and people being afraid of electing me as their mayor and their representative, because I was First Nations. They said things like, if we elect you, they're gonna the natives are gonna come and take back the shores of our properties, and comments like that. And I challenged the conversation and welcomed people to, without, like Chief Collins said, without being angry and without pushing back and just being.
How can you not be, though? Sorry, not to interrupt you, but how can you not be angry? It's a human reaction because you're someone's saying something that's hateful and hurtful.
It's more frustrating in the lack of knowledge of our Indigenous people and our First Nations communities. Like, try to explain to people that, Chief Collins community isn't coming for our shorelines and our properties and stuff like that. And we're not looking to take over anything that's existing. We're looking for coexistence and to strive and to build together. And that was my first clear indication that our residents in our municipalities needed educating on First Nations people and the history of Indigenous people in Ontario specifically, that they just didn't understand the history, and they didn't understand that there was, community intentions for me living in the community to want to be a leader in that community in the decision-making process and in improving our community and making things better for our families and our children, and that it wasn't about me being First Nations and trying to come in and take over. So there was a huge education piece to that campaign.
Chief Collins, I heard you laughing.
Well, I just, you cannot get it. I mean, it's hard not to get angry sometimes, but I think that's exactly what they're looking for, you to get angry. And you got to control your emotions at a lot of times. I mean, you're pushed to the brink of getting angry, but I mean, that's exactly what they're looking for. And then sometimes you just hold your ground and, smile and go about your business that you're mandated to do, and that's how you make progress. And I first got elected in 1998, and I didn't think I was going to be around this long. And just making those strong relationships and building good friendships with people, and it's taken me a long ways and carried me to this far in my political career as chief in Fort Wayne. So it's. You want to get mad, but you try not to, and you got to learn how to smile and shrug it off sometimes. But even though some of the things that they say can really push your buttons in the wrong way. So, I mean, and that's exactly what people are looking for, that anger and animosity to come out of you. But I think if you smile and grin at them, it even irks them that much more.
It confuses them. Mayor Therrien, First Nations issues are largely under provincial and federal jurisdiction. What can municipalities do?
Yeah, so, within the scope of municipal responsibility, there's always opportunities to, open conversations and, to speak to the point that's been raised about education. When I was on council for 4 years and then elected in mayor. And so back in 2019 was the first year that the city of Peterborough celebrated National Indigenous Peoples Day. Things like that, which, maybe don't take that much time or energy, but really go a long way in sort of demonstrating solidarity and awareness and education. When in the first couple months of my election, I encouraged senior staff and council to participate in the Association of Municipalities of Ontario's First Nations 101 sort of online course that they have, because I think a lot of folks are just lacking that education. And I see that quite frequently, even with some folks who are kind of scared to read the land acknowledgement because they're not sure how to pronounce Anishinaabe, and they're afraid to ask. And so I think, it's just trying to continue on that education piece is really important. And municipalities do have an obligation to advance that as much as possible, and doing that in a way that's not putting additional labor on Indigenous folks, right? Which I know can be a challenge. So, there's a lot of examples of things that are fairly, to me, common sense and straightforward around raising that awareness and inviting people into that conversation. That's certainly something I think all municipalities can and should do.
I wanted to ask the next question to all of you. When we talk about relationships, if relationship building is about regular contact, what are some ways in which those connections can be maintained? Mayor Landry, I'll start with you.
Yeah, no, Chief Collins mentioned joint council meetings or meetings with chief and council, or some members of chief and council meeting with municipalities is a great way to continue and have that commitment of regular meetings. I know that in Northwestern Ontario, Mayor Lawrence and Sioux Lookout, Mayor Dumas in Marathon, my own chief in Red Rock Indian Band, they have quasi-council meetings. They have regular meetings in contact to discuss the different things that are coming up in municipalities and the First Nations that they can work together on, and that commitment. So not to just meet once in a blue moon, but to have a regular commitment of regular meetings so that they're staying in contact all the time and understanding what each of the communities are dealing with and what issues are of the priority at the moment. So having that regular contact is super important. And if you're going to commit to the relationship, then make sure that you're committing to the relationship in the same way that you would in any of your other relationships, for regular communication and regular contact.
And Mayor Therrien?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely having those set meetings, and at the sort of more formal level, we have set quarterly meetings between staff at the city and Hiawatha and Curve Lake, as well as some of the elected officials. Picking up the phone is always like the easiest thing in terms of just keeping that dialogue going. And something that I've tried to do, and I know you used a picture of it earlier, is use social media to try to advance some of that education and communications piece. So Chief Carr and Chief Weetong have both joined me on Instagram Live in the past, and we're going to be doing that again in the future, just to demonstrate to people that these, relationships are very important, and also then to provide a platform to raise awareness about a lot of the issues that are facing our communities.
What are some of those issues?
So, the Instagram Live that we did back in the summer had to do with, residential school discoveries, which again aren't news to anybody in the community that's been told these stories for generations. But, we talk about issues around, that are impacting the community. So again, because Hiawatha and Curve Lake aren't in the city, but, that we're all in the same watershed, and we know that Anishinaabeg are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters. So anything that might impact that, we try to have a discussion about. And the things on social media, we also try to keep more kind of light and accessible. So even talking about things like what, treaty territory we're on, because a lot of folks in Peterborough don't necessarily know that they're on Williams Treaty territory. So kind of starting at the basics in some ways, and raising awareness about that is important.
And Chief Collins, where would you like to see more collaborations between your two groups?
It's a good question. I mean, like right now, I think we've been put on pause because of COVID. Like I said, we used to have quarterly meetings with the city of Thunder Bay, with council meetings. COVID come along, things change in a different direction. But right now, the city of Thunder Bay and Fort William continue to work with each other on many issues right now that are impacting our community, impacting the city of Thunder Bay. Homelessness, the migration of illicit drugs in our city of Thunder Bay, COVID itself. I mean, we continue to deal with it on a regular basis. We have weekly meetings now, and dealing with those issues and making sure that the work that we do together is an important aspect of keeping our community safe. One of the things that I think we trended in the right direction. The city of Thunder Bay now flies a flag permanently at City Hall. Finally, Thunder Bay Policing Service fly flag at City Hall. University flies our flag, recognizing the territory of Fort William. And I think that's the important aspect of trending in the right direction, recognizing the land and territory of the community that's they're occupying. So that's an important aspect.
When it comes to issues of economic development or local resource projects, there is a duty to consult. I wanted to read something from the Global Mail from September 2021 by Doug Anderson and Alexandra Flynn. They write, there has been significant discussion recently over whether municipalities are a crown with a duty to consult as the provinces and federal government are. Numerous court cases have argued that the duty does not extend to municipalities. At the same time, some provinces, including Ontario and Saskatchewan, have explicitly or implicitly delegated the duty to municipalities. This leaves Indigenous communities caught in a cat and mouse game of whether municipalities must exercise this duty. Mayor Therrien, should municipalities have the duty to consult?
I think so. Certainly, while we are, not the crown and don't have that, that authority, there's so many issues that municipalities are responsible for that do directly impact First Nations. So under the Ontario Planning Act, they do kind of spell out the ways that you need to engage with First Nations when it comes to those applications. And I think absolutely, just to move forward in good faith, it is really important to have ongoing consultation about projects that are happening in a municipality.
Do you think further legislation is needed to make it more clear?
I think that would be helpful, absolutely, because as was said, the sort of cat and mouse game, and we see that happening, at different levels, provincial and federal as well. So the more clarity around it, the better, and that would also push municipalities that aren't as proactive on that to have to kind of follow that process.
And Mayor Landry, do you ever get pushback from other members of council when it comes to further involving Indigenous participation on various issues?
No, I don't get pushback. But I think to comment on the duty to consult piece, that, it puts municipalities and First Nations in a forced relationship if the Crown or the province insists on duty to consult on projects like culverts and stuff like that. So that's where it's really important to have those relationships early, and having friends before the government says you need a friend, or a project instructs you to participate in a duty to consult situation. And I think that if I wouldn't call it pushback, but I think there's a need for understanding from council members to understand why you need to involve your neighboring First Nations on your official plans and the projects that you're doing, and how that it might affect our way of life in some capacity. I know with our official plan, there was a request from Indigenous communities that if we were ever going to close any of the access points to Lake Superior, that we inform our communities, our First Nations communities, and have a discussion. And by all means, that is an acceptable request when you're accessing something like Lake Superior, for example, for the source of not only water but for fishing and the livelihood of our commercial fishermen, etc. So I think, again, it needs to be that level of understanding. And if you have those relationships beforehand, you'll understand why that need to have those discussions on projects, and when consultation comes up, if it's a priority to the First Nation to have that discussion, or if it's something that the chief would say that, and chief and council would say that, go ahead, or there was no concerns to some degree on some projects, but the need is there, the effect is there, the relationship is absolutely 100% necessary in moving forward in anything like that.
And Chief Collins, I've got about 45 seconds left, and I'm going to ask you a very big question. Can we ever reach a day where we don't see each other as us and them, but truly be partners?
Yeah, I think we can do that. And I think we're going to get to that point in the city of Thunder Bay. Like I said, we made great progress here. I think, when you talk about legislation, I mean, right now the city has great dialogue with Fort William, and when things are looking at development in the city of Thunder Bay, I mean, a lot of communities can't say that, but I can honestly say that we continue to work together without forced legislation on them. And I'm honored to see that, and I'm great that it's working that way for us here in our region. But I think, I'll go back to a comment my auntie made to me before she passed away several years ago now. She said, do you think we'll ever see a day when we can work together in honesty, with respect of each other? And I couldn't answer it then. I don't think I can answer it now, but if we continue working in the fashion that we're working and continue building that relationship, continue being friends and continue having good dialogue with each other, that trend will finally make a direction where it's not just us or them. It's both of us together that working in a unified front to build a strong economy, strong, healthy organizations, dealing with the opiate crisis, dealing with mental health, dealing with homelessness. We all have to work together to change that trend. So I have a strong relationship with the city of Thunder Bay. I continue, like Mayor Morrow was texting me just before we started this Zoom meeting. So, I mean, yeah, we continue to have dialogue and making sure that we're on the same page. And I'm honored to be working with both the city of Thunder Bay and Mayor Morrow and his aspect and his role as the mayor of the city of Thunder Bay. So we work together, and I think that's the only way we're ever going to get out of this.
And I think this was a great start. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your very, very busy schedules to share your thoughts with us. We've learned so much and really do appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Rural Ontario has a lot to offer, including jobs. But getting new talent to fill them is not as simple as people there would like. Here for more, we welcome in Walkerton, Ontario, Gemma Mendez-Smith. She's Executive Director of the Four-County Labour Market Planning Board. And in the township of Eris, just north of Guelph, Ashley Whedon, PhD candidate in Rural Studies at the University of Guelph. And we're delighted to welcome you two back onto our airwaves here at TVO tonight. I just want to start by actually showing a map of a place that I suspect, of the 15 million people who live in the province of Ontario, how many people have never heard of Saugeen Shores? I'm willing to bet the majority. But there it is, in Bruce County, just south of the Bruce Peninsula, on Lake Huron. And we're going to talk about Saugeen Shores this evening. Ashley, you recently examined this town. What was the purpose of your examination?
Right. So we worked with the University of Guelph, Bruce Power, and the town of Saugeen Shores, as well as a number of wonderful local advisors like Gemma, to explore the labor market dynamics in Saugeen Shores. Because when we talk about changing rural regions, this is a really great case study in what that means. So Bruce Power actually represents the largest infrastructure investment in the country at the present time. It's the refurbishment of the major component replacement is actually just this huge driver for local economic development and growth. And with that economic development and growth comes a variety of sort of challenges and opportunities. So we have this interesting change in the local labor force dynamic around the nuclear ecosystem, creating all of these largely high-paying, stable jobs, and then sort of a tourism and hospitality-driven economy through the rest of the year, through the summer, and a changing economy away from balancing historical strengths in agriculture and manufacturing. So you have all of these changing dynamics that you can see. This year, U-Haul said that the Owen Sound and Port Elgin area were among the top 10 in-growth communities in terms of people relocating to that area based on U-Haul driving metrics. And then also this idea that over the last few years, Saugeen Shores has been among the top 25 places to live in the province and in the country. So what does that mean for people that want to work, live, and enjoy the area? So we did this work sort of exploring this,
hang on. Before you go there, let me jump in before you go there, because I want to, you've talked about what some of the great things are about living there. You've got a stable employment possibility because of the nuclear power plant. You've got things to do there. You did mention challenges as well. What are some of the difficulties about being in Saugeen Shores?
So we have these challenges again when we have this sort of uneven economic growth, and we would talk about this in terms of a K-shaped economy, right? So you have everything related to the economic industry connected to nuclear energy kind of going in this upward direction. And then you tend to have the difficulties of maintaining staff, of affording to stay in the area if you're not working in the nuclear sector, around who has access to those jobs and those skills, and then making sure that your infrastructure investments around everything from housing to childcare to social amenities is keeping up as well. And that's sort of the other shape of the K that we're trying to address in those challenges. So in this uneven economic growth, we have issues around affordability of housing, which I know you're going to talk about in another section as well for the show. A tension between the haves and the have-nots in terms of people really having this sharp perception of, if I'm not associated with the nuclear energy sector, I'm really struggling to get by. And then finally, this vulnerability that gets created when we focus on a single economic sector. So we saw this in generations previous with sort of manufacturing or milling or natural resource development dependency. When we focus on one particular driver in our economies, it creates this vulnerability in terms of, will we be able to survive if something happens to that industry? So the real challenges are, how do you address that perception that growth isn't benefiting everybody and fostering community cohesion in an area that's actually, you know, the legacy of amalgamation from the 2000s is pretty strong as well between Southampton, Port Elgin, and Saugeen Township.
Gotcha. Okay, that's a good roadmap to start us off here. And in fact, you're right. Tomorrow night, we're going to be talking about the housing crunch in rural Ontario. We know about it in urban Ontario, but it's in rural Ontario too. Gemma, let me get you in here at this point and talk to us about what your role was in the Saugeen Shores project.
Steve, it was really to kind of focus on that workforce development piece and making sure that we don't just focus on the growth that's happening at Bruce Power with the Life Extension Project, and talking also about what skills local people can add to their repertoire, add to their resume, what local training do we need to address to ensure that our local residents can also have access to those available jobs, not just at the Bruce Power plant, but all the other supply chain industries that did move into the area to support that work. So a lot of work around skills development and what do we need to attract and retain, because the biggest challenge is retaining that workforce once we've attracted them to the area. We also do have a very low unemployment rate, which needs to be considered in this whole discussion, because with a low unemployment rate, the reality is we won't have the skills in our region. So huge attraction associated to housing, but not just for the nuclear plant, also for all the other supporting and locally grown industries in our region.
That's the story in Saugeen Shores, but how much, Gemma, from your perch, could you say this is reflective, in fact, of a much bigger phenomenon across the entire province? Can you say that?
Not necessarily for one reason. And the growth is happening primarily in Saugeen Shores. So all the other surrounding rural municipalities are not necessarily seeing the same type of success from the investment and growth. But also we do have a chronically low unemployment rate, like I mentioned before, and that's been about 10 years. So we have held the spot, I wouldn't say lofty spot, of the lowest unemployment rate for about a decade now. And that means that we don't have the people to fill the thousands of jobs that go unfilled and the vacancies that sit in our region at the moment. So I think that would be one of the unique things in our region, holding that spot as the lowest unemployment rate.
Interesting. Ashley, they used to say that one of rural Ontario's best exports are its people, right? People left. But now we have seen, as was just indicated, we're seeing more people moving into rural Ontario these days. I mean, presumably the pandemic has a lot to do with that, but are there any other explanations as well?
So I think going ahead with, we've had sort of more than a decade, or actually more than 25 years of local economic development strategies in rural Ontario and across rural Canada saying, you know, come live, build your business, build your life in these communities due to affordability, due to close proximity to family or neighbors, due to the opportunities, like Gemma mentioned, around if you're looking for work, there's probably someone looking for your skills. And so we've seen sort of the long game around this sort of culminate in the pressures that we experienced around the pandemic. Now, this comes with an interesting double-sided kind of conversation, and that means that when we're talking about those issues, we need to make sure that we're keeping up our investment in housing stock, that the kinds of jobs that we're asking people to come and fill, pay a living wage, or have the kind of benefits associated with them that need to support the rest of your life. And this was a big part of the the Saugeen Shores work, and actually the big impetus why the town reached out and wanted to work with Bruce Power and the University of Guelph to explore this was this idea that, you know, they were hearing from employers that, you know, we can't retain staff, the staff we can retain can't afford to live in the community, or if they live outside of the community, they can't afford to get to their job. And so we have much more than just sort of a labor issue. We have a whole community issue in terms of making sure that not only when we attract people or retain them, as Gemma says, you know, that we give youth the opportunity when they leave that they want to come back or they want to relocate in another rural place. We need to make sure that they're not arriving maybe to a job that can't support them in developing a high quality life, or that they have a place to live, they have childcare, they have access to all the other supports. And that's what really came clear when we were talking to both employers and people that were looking for work or were working in the area, that it's not just the job, it's all these other things that I need. And so as we're seeing this trend of growth and attraction to rural places for a wide variety of reasons, we need to also be mindful of how are we investing in all those services that will make that a place that people can stay and build their lives, recognizing that we've historically underinvested in rural communities for the last 20 to 30 years.
Gemma, which jobs do you think are the ones that are going the most underutilized or unfilled, if I can put it that way?
Well, we have mostly those entry-level positions. We just did some work around remote work and talking about our area's propensity to support remote work and teleworking. And what we do know is 98% of the vacancies in our region need people in the jobs to perform those jobs. And they're mostly entry-level positions. So you asked Steve about people moving to the area and how has that supported the local economy. And yes, we did have an influx of people, but with the introduction of remote work and working from home, the people that are moving are not necessarily coming to take the jobs that are available. So we still find ourselves in a position where many of our entry-level positions are going unfilled. We don't have the population in our region looking for work that could fill those positions. So really it is an attraction strategy, but more so a retention as well strategy that Ashley alluded to earlier. But looking at those the realities around what people need to live and stay here is really important, and hence some of the work that we've done around the precarious living series.
Well, presumably those jobs, if they're, I don't know if this is the right way to put it, but if they're starter jobs or if they're jobs that are often filled by young people who are sort of just getting going in their careers, you're talking about trying to get young people to move to parts of the province that they may not even know about, or whom they may have an impression that this is a part of the province that you go to when you're retired. How do you deal with that image?
I think what we need to look at more so is our focus on our local residents. So while our unemployment rate is low, we do have people in our region that with a little bit of training and a little bit of working around their situations around precarity, whether that's transportation, housing, there are people we can engage in our community to help with those entry-level positions. But there are also many jobs that people can move here and as they look at career laddering. So it's a two-pronged approach, and we certainly want people to see the value of getting that first-time experience in the workplace, but certainly there are places that they can grow into as well.
Actually, it's interesting. We often hear stories about the fact that it's very tough to recruit, for example, doctors to go to more rural parts of the province. You don't traditionally think of attracting, let's say, waiters to more rural parts of the province as being a difficult thing. But I don't know. Is that a story that needs telling more often?
We need to talk about how we retain all of the skills we need in a community. Exactly. So doctors being a big issue around that. And then that creates kind of what we talk about in terms of a vicious cycle, where if we're not, attracting all of the cornerstone institutions or investments in infrastructure we need in a community around housing, healthcare, education, social supports, living wage, all of those kinds of high impact, high quality of life things, as we de-invest in those or we're unable to do them, people say, well, I can't get into a family doctor, so I'm not going to stay. And then I might not get that entry level job because I'm going to leave to go somewhere else. And then we create this kind of spiral that goes downward. And what we really want to see is a virtuous cycle, right? Heading upwards around what do we need to invest in to make sure that we do recruit and retain exactly all of those positions, as Gemma was talking about, as you're mentioning. And I'll just give a personal anecdote. When I first moved up to work for Grey County, I was 25. I moved there in December. Even with a sort of a lifelong connection to the area, it was a bit of a change. It was a big shock. But my attitude there was that was where I knew I wanted to be, and I'd rather spend my life building my career base there rather than driving there on the weekends or whenever I could get a chance to go camping or those kinds of things. So in some degrees, there is a bit of that agency around where do I want to be, but how do we make that possible for the widest number of people possible? And that means exactly as you said, Steve, creating conditions where taking a service industry job is not seen as lesser than, that provides you with all of the income and social well-being that you need. And we're seeing employers come up with creative solutions for that. They just need a little bit more support to get there. So when we're talking about housing or other infrastructure around childcare and supports to social networks that let you feel like you're part of the community, those are all a big part of that. And I think there's been a recent article, I think in the Financial Post, that talks about this on a wider scale, including some folks from Paisley and the surrounding area around how they're trying to adjust to those as well. So I recommend folks check that out.
Okay. Gemma, maybe you could build on that by saying, I want to know what the pitch is. I want to know when somebody, for example, who might grow up in Grey County and decides for whatever reason they want to go to college or university further south, maybe to a more urban area. What's the pitch that you would make to them to say, we know you left for 3 or 4 or 5 years or whatever to do your post-secondary in the South, but come back because what?
Opportunity. And that means that our employers, our community needs to be pitching these opportunities to our young people, particularly when they go off to post-secondary. Some of the work that we did in previous years, Steve, actually highlighted that our post-secondary fields of study didn't actually match what's happening in our economy. So a lot of education to our young people about this is where you can see your career trajectory. So this is where you should be studying, and those fields of study then will match. If you go off and take a post-secondary education that doesn't match what's required in the region, it's hard to make the decision to move back to Grey County, Bruce County, Huron or Perth. So making sure that you know what's happening, and us as a community information providers, letting our young people know and letting everyone know this is where you can live and have fun, but you can actually build a career here as well. So take that information outside of our borders and make sure people are hearing that message.
The bright lights of the big city are really attractive to a lot of young people, though, Gemma. What do you do about that?
Well, I think people need to go out and experience those bright lights. I did that. I came as a youth to Canada and I lived in the big city. But once I started to think about settling down, I decided rural communities were where I wanted to be. And our family's been in this rural community now for 20 years. And my career, as Ashley started in this area as an administrative assistant. And here I am 20 years later representing an organization that has quite an impact in the community as an executive director. Did I see that coming? Absolutely not. But I was able to learn and grow my skills right here in this small community and be in this position today. So I think there are many opportunities we don't see right off the bat, but taking that first step as to, where do I want to be? How do I want to live? What do I want to experience? And make those decisions, I think we can see some wonderful things happen in people's futures. And that's the message I would like to send, that rural communities, yes, the story is low unemployment rate and those types of things, transportation, but we're working on those things. Many initiatives exist right now that are addressing those issues, and we're seeing immense success in our region.
Ashley, let me get your take on this, because, in politics, they don't only tell you should vote for me because I'm so great. They also say you should vote for me because my opponent is terrible. And I wonder if you need to make the same kind of pitch. Namely, not only is life in rural Ontario terrific, but why would you want to live in places of so much density and COVID-19 and all that other misery when you can get away from it by coming to rural Ontario? Is that a potential pitch?
Well, I think I always worry about pitting communities against each other because I think there's value in all places. But I also think that, certainly what Gemma was talking about in my own experience and the experience of the people that we worked with in this research project that we did in Saugeen Shores, the overarching pitch or sell or whatever we want to call it for rural communities is that truly, because we're in this period where we're trying to figure out what comes next, where we're trying to decide on how we build the future we want to see, there's this opportunity to have an even greater impact when you're in a place that has fewer people and this greater scope of opportunity of what's possible. And so what I would pitch is that if you're at all curious, if you have curiosity about what exactly you want to achieve or do or push or explore, that there's the chance, and the very real chance, that you can do that and be supported in a rural environment. All of the pieces that go into that are making sure that we're shoring up that curiosity with all of the supports that are necessary in order to allow people of any age, young people or otherwise, to be able to pursue those opportunities. And so, yeah, I do see this for me personally, and for many people that we talk to when we're working in these communities. I struggled to feel like I was having an impact in a larger urban environment. And then when I moved and was working in the early days of my career in rural and small towns, I could see that impact immediately. And that is so wonderfully fulfilling and also addicting, because you want to keep having that impact. So I'm with Gemma in terms of that regards of you may enjoy certain qualities about Toronto, about other large cities, but the coolest part about rural and small towns is that if you want to see those kinds of things, if you want those experiences, you have the opportunity to create them there. You get to be the curator of the best new restaurant or the best arts and culture event or a really innovative and cool new business that you're building or a leading initiative in the local government. And so that's the invitation that I offer to people, is really that if you really want to try something new and you want to invest deeply, not only in yourself, but in using those skills to build a community you're proud of, there's no greater opportunity than in a rural or small town place.
Gemma, in our last minute here, I know the city I'm coming to you from right now. If you want to buy a detached home, the average price is $1.4 million. What is it where you are?
Well, it's not quite that high, but it's comparable. And I would say anywhere from 500 to 700,000 across our region. Those are the prices we're seeing. And so again, we come to people who can afford those homes, and that's what we need to be working on, making sure that there is affordability of housing at all levels. And we will be a successful community if that's the only thing we addressed immediately.
It costs $500,000 to buy a home in Walkerton?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
Yes, and actually, we have many homes that are being sold that are going well above asking. And it's the same phenomena in the city is happening here in our rural communities. And just within the last 18 months or so, we see that really excelling and exacerbating the housing situation in our region.
Well, that sets us up nicely for the discussion we're going to have on our program tomorrow night, because we are going to focus on the housing crunch in rural Ontario, yes. So let me thank Ashley Whedon and Gemma Mendez-Smith for joining us tonight on TVO. Be well, you two. Stay safe, and we'll see you again down the road, I'm sure.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
And that is the agenda for Monday, January 24th, 2022. Tomorrow, as we suggested, you've heard all about the housing crunch in big urban areas of this province. Did you know there is one in rural Ontario too? You do now. We'll focus on that tomorrow. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism. Looking for more of TVO's in-depth current affairs and documentaries? Visit tvo.org/daily and sign up for our daily newsletter with links to agenda interviews, read Steve Paikin's articles, and preview our upcoming documentaries. That's all at tvo.org/daily.